It was just that he was all alone, always by himself. Never anyone to share the game. A man who lived in dreams. That's who he was.
Whatever, I just wanted to compete now. Enough is enough. Let's get me back in the mix. It's a forgetful business, Ariel. You know that yourself. Sure, look, Nate was out of the game, and now he's back and he's on top. It's a crazy business we are in, but make no mistake, the skills are there for me, and I know what I can bring to the table and what I will bring to the table, and I'm very, very excited to give my fans something to cheer about again. You know what I mean? I do this for my fans, for the people that are supporting me, for the people that dare to dream the highest of heights. So I look forward to my triumphant return, Ariel. Stare at your past and you'll end up staying there. It's okay to look back and admire it, but you carry on. I'm not in the business of staring back at it. You know what I mean? And getting lost back there. People say a loss can make or break a fighter, but trust me, a win can also make or break a fighter, because they get comfortable with a win. People can get comfortable with a win, and slack off then. Slack off on the training, slack off on the diet. They've won one. They're winners now. That's not me, you know. You sleep on a win and you'll wake up with a loss. So I just carry on.
From a man with a simple dream of making it in this very cruel, cold, and brutal game, the measures that Conor McGregor has taken to get to the top were sometimes questionable, yes, but seemingly necessary. Being the sport's biggest fighter, even after only competing once in MMA in almost over 3 years, his return, however, had been mentioned to be happening this year. Only as we're nearing the end of the year, such claims seem very unlikely. And he obviously had his reasons. Having a suspension that lasted up until April, followed by an injury, we can understand what is taking him so long. However, whether he returns in late 2019 or early 2020, one thing that is certain is that return precisely. With everything that has been going on with Conor McGregor, it is easy to be stuck in the past when all that we have gotten from him were incidents after incidents. Now, I have a couple graded topics to dive into. And no, we won't be discussing much about the bad last 2 years he's had outside of the octagon. And because of it, there have been many discussions about whether Conor McGregor is completely finished with the sport that made him who he is today. So in today's video, I want to talk about the return of Conor McGregor before it is too late. Let us start from the beginning. It is November 2016. Conor McGregor is headlining the first ever UFC event in the state of New York in an attempt of unifying the featherweight and lightweight titles and becoming the first ever fighter to be champion in 2 different weight classes at the very same time. Going into this fight, Conor avenged his only loss inside the UFC against Stockton's own Nathan Diaz. In many ways, it seemed as if this was something Conor needed the most. Not avenging the loss, but losing. Because before the loss, that is when we saw what I call the ugly side of Conor McGregor. The side that we all saw during the Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor build-up. Far removed from his calculated mental warfare, inspirational quotes, very accurate breakdowns of his opponents. Just in general, he seemed like a man with a plan. And Conor is a person who is very determined to reach his goals. But the problem lies with what happens after those goals are reached. After beating Jose Aldo, Conor essentially showed similar behavior going into his fight with Nate Diaz as he did against Khabib. Not respecting who he is facing, just didn't care, and his fighting showed that exactly. Overestimating what he could do to a much heavier opponent than what he is used to fighting. Against Diaz, coming forward without really much calculation in regards of his stamina efficiency, he didn't really respect what Nate could do, and he just essentially blew all of his chances in the fight after only 1 round. And immediately after losing, he got a big reality check, one that was needed in order to better himself for a bigger challenge that he set himself up to. After his loss, I would say that was when his ego got deflated, and it kind of took that ugly side right out of Conor. And one thing about Conor that I have observed is the fact that he's very aware of everything, everybody, even himself. How ironic that may sound right now, it really was the case back then. But after beating Chapman as becoming the interim champion, going in there and knocking out Jose Aldo, unifying the belts, then moving up and fighting Nate Diaz, he was just too in over his head essentially. He just did not think that Nate Diaz was going to be something out of the ordinary, and that is going to be a big problem whenever you're fighting at this very level of mixed martial arts. So the loss really gave him a big lesson that he could learn from, and he came back stronger than when he went into the first fight. Round number 2, 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Conor McGregor defeats Eddie Alvarez by way of TKO, becoming the first ever dual weight world champion. Conor conquered yet another challenge. However, unlike his usual post-fight interviews, he did not mention who would be next, even after Khabib Nurmagomedov called him out a couple hours earlier.
Conor, this is obviously a massive accomplishment. What challenges you now? What do you want to do?
Listen, thanks everyone for coming out. Look, what's next for me, Joe? I'm gonna get that second belt. Where the f is it?
It was a good performance. I mean, yeah, what he was talking as well was, I mean, look, he's fought once in 8 years. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he ain't fight too frequent for my liking. He's a consistent pull-out merchant. He had a good performance tonight. Fair play to him. We'll see where it goes.
However, at this time, everybody was calling out Conor McGregor, and I'm pretty certain that he just thought to himself, well, kid, join the line. Also, at this time, Khabib was a very uncertain fight to take, as he had pulled out and missed weight before. And besides, a win over Michael Johnson does not cement his position as the mandatory fighter for the title shot, because back then, it was still a battle between Tony and Khabib. Who deserved it? To know this, we had to have them fight, and it is still a fight that hasn't happened up until this day. So, Conor said that he wanted to go ahead, take some time off, as he had been in 4 bouts in the last 11 months, a very impressive feat. Now, during this time, his featherweight title had been taken away from him when the headliner for UFC 206 had been cancelled between Daniel Cormier and Rumble Johnson for the light heavyweight title. As the UFC seems to be infatuated with having a world title as the main event, they stripped Conor of his title and made Max Holloway vs Anthony Pettis for the interim title, as then interim champion Jose Aldo got promoted to champion. Following that, the cancellation of Tony Ferguson and Khabib happened at UFC 205, and seemingly at that time, Conor McGregor did not have an opponent in line, and nobody really could blame him for not coming back to fight back then. 2017 came to an end where we saw Conor McGregor compete in boxing against the pound-for-pound best Floyd Money Mayweather. In a pretty valiant effort, Conor came up short in the fight, but he won the lottery, leaving the night with millions of dollars added to his bank account. As Conor McGregor still hadn't returned to the octagon, the UFC had crowned a new world champion in Khabib Nurmagomedov, who defeated replacement for Tony Ferguson, Al Iaquinta, in a one-sided affair. However, days prior, Conor had a big rampage when he found out his teammate Artem Lobov got cornered by Khabib and his crew, flying to New York and trying to get into a fight with Khabib backstage then and there. And this is when the ugly side started to resurface once again, going ahead and throwing a dolly at the bus. This to me seems like a very big overreaction, because surely Khabib couldn't have gotten under his skin that much, could he? Well, in reality he did. He called out Conor at UFC 205, had numerous things to say about him when asked, and he had a big backstage face-off with him, which seemed very tense. Now, this may not seem like anything new on the surface. I believe that the fact that Khabib and himself hadn't fought yet really started to annoy him, especially with how forgetful the sport can be. Khabib became the new guy on the block when Conor was becoming the old guy who sat at his porch. With really no reason to lash back out at Khabib, Conor had to wait for something to tick him off and go all out. And he let himself go, and maybe a bit too much. It was announced Conor would return to face Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229. Now, by this point, Conor became somewhat silent. He hadn't really talked directly to the public in regards of his next fight, next goals in MMA, and he just seemed like he kept this top dog or kingpin act up for too long, because after a long while, people started to forget about him. If Conor was direct and less formal with the public, I think he wouldn't have let his ego get into his head so much, because going into this fight with Khabib, Conor was a champ who defeated Jose Aldo, defeated Eddie Alvarez, unified the titles, reached a new frequency in the sport, and he was comfortable there really. But by that time, that was almost 2 years ago. And 2 years in the sport of mixed martial arts is a very long time, and things can change very rapidly without you even noticing. Fighters can evolve and become as good as you, if not better. Fighters can become bigger than you. things of that nature. And by that point, Khabib Nurmagomedov was a fan favorite. People were already fairly certain that he was going to be the guy that was going to go in there and defeat Conor McGregor, humble him, and make him just be forgotten in the sport of MMA, so that the sport can finally move on without really being that attached to Conor McGregor. So when the first press conference was set up, that is where the ugly side of Conor McGregor really became uglier. Both Conor and Khabib walked into a seemingly empty theater with only the press who were present there, and now having a really good reason to go in there and talk about Khabib, Conor came back to say that he just only came back to shut this man up. This man, as if Khabib was just another Joe, right? So the idea that a new challenger would rise and bring something new seemed like a stretch, I would assume, for Conor, simplifying Khabib to a wrestler with an overhand. And that is one thing that I believe Conor got really deluded by. It was his own inaccurate portrayal of his opponent Khabib. Not the best of mindset to be in when you're going into a fight with the undefeated grappling phenom. And his mindset really proved to be all wrong. Seemingly his ugly side had reached a new level, completely careless, even more careless than what he was going into the Diaz fight, and seemed very uninterested in Khabib. He seemed more interested in his whiskey, Proper 12.
Here I am, returned to take back my throne.
It is fight night, and everything that people speculated before leading up to this fight, whether the mentality was right or wrong, was going to be proven to be true or false. So Conor McGregor walks out, and he looks very messy in his appearance, as if he just woke up and he was just going to casually slap Khabib Nurmagomedov around. Crossing over to Khabib, Khabib is very focused, ready for the job. So they both step inside the octagon. Conor does his usual Vince McMahon strut. However, even that looked messy. I don't know how he could do that, but it did. Goes ahead, taps his logo on the canvas, and then they face off. And Conor's looking at the big screen, checking himself out, not really even focusing on his opponent Khabib Nurmagomedov. And at this point, this was a very big alarming sign for me. Usually, at this moment, Conor is in the state of zen right now. He's very calm and focused, yet he wasn't. The same way that he wasn't against Nate, he wasn't against Khabib. While followed is fairly common memory at this point, Conor's over-aggressive approach didn't work in his favor against Khabib. He didn't show respect towards his skill, and he didn't really listen to his corner either. His corner were urging him to stay calm, keep Khabib backed up behind the black line. He still didn't really listen.
When he got behind the black line, you chased him. So let's keep him behind the black line, let him come to you. Your left hand will be there. Do not chase him this round. Draw him on.
It only took the worst round in his entire professional career, where he finally went back to his corner and listened, and then he had his best round in the third round, which, you know, quote unquote best. It really is a big woo for what happened. He just made it somewhat competitive in that round, because at that point he already got beaten down in 2 rounds. He didn't have sting in his shots, his legs were heavy, and he just didn't seem like he'd be able to KO Khabib. The fight ended in the 4th round via submission, and Conor lost his biggest UFC fight to date. Now, this is where the most important part of the video lies. You see, after the fight, Conor did not show up to the press conference, which really told me more than enough, because how can you not show up to the post-fight press conference? It's not like he never lost before. He did show up against Nate Diaz, and he had a pretty honorable way of going out that night, really. But against Khabib, he just seemed like he didn't care, like he had something better to do or something, right? And what I hoped that loss would have embodied would have been something similar to the Nate Diaz 1 fight, where he got humbled in a way, goes back to the drawing board, reevaluates the situation, comes back stronger. But no, he just simply goes in there, posts a picture with his Proper 12 in his hand. He says, "You lost the match but won the battle." And obviously, in a way, you can take this as Conor McGregor not being broken by the defeat. Well, that is very good, which I believe to be very true. Because at the same time against Nate Diaz, he wasn't really broken either. He just knew that he had the wrong approach, thus not resulting with the best outcome in his favor. Now, obviously, he just went ahead and broke the fight down how he saw it play out. He mentioned what he did wrong and how he's fairly certain that he's not going to be making the same mistakes in the rematch. He also said that if the rematch doesn't present itself, he's willing to fight whoever is next in line. And when he said that, everything was already falling in place. Nothing else needed to be said. Only thing that had to be said that would have been of any importance would be the next opponent. Now, I'll spare you guys the details, but Conor was supposed to come back this summer, 2019, against Justin Gaethje after negotiations fell through with Conor for the Cerrone fight. However, that fight with Justin Gaethje, it got scrapped when Conor McGregor injured his hand. Now, besides a single Instagram post about it, we didn't really know what it truly meant. Did this mean that Conor McGregor was setting up a fight with Justin Gaethje? Because we didn't really know to begin with. Nothing really came out in terms of news that was of any significance. And all that we were doing was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And before we know it, 2019 is halfway through and we're wondering, when is Conor going to come back when the entire lightweight division is just seemingly moving around Conor? Now, one thing that I want to really get clear when it comes to Conor is that many people kind of mistake his silence for not having anything planned. I believe Conor is right now in a position where whenever he talks, the instant question of, oh, when are you back, will appear. So I think the only time that Conor is really going to talk is when he has to really talk, when the time is right. He went into Tony Robbins' podcast and he talked about everything thoroughly regarding the Khabib fight, what would be next, things of that nature. Now, for me personally, what I heard in that podcast was more than enough, really. However, there was still one thing that I believe that the entire community of fighting could really benefit from, was somebody that would go in there and ask him the hard-hitting questions. Questions that he didn't answer at the post-fight press conference. And really, we only saw him talk when things were convenient, right? It wasn't until he made a big mistake in a pub earlier this year that he really had to sit down in front of the people and really just talk and be honest and just sit there and just answer all the questions that the people were really asking of him. It seems to me that finally Conor feels like he has to prove himself again and win over the crowd after what happened. And I think that has been the most honest that Conor has been ever since maybe going into the UFC fight or after losing to Floyd Mayweather, but that fight is kind of irrelevant to everything regarding MMA. So when that interview was over and done with, I felt like Conor McGregor really was fired up and ready to go. I think that he really felt that the crowd turned their backs on him, the people turned their backs on him, and he really had to fight an uphill battle. Because just losing to Khabib, in a way, okay, cool, right? He can go in there and try again, whatever. But there seemed so many things wrong with him at that point. Everything seemed foggy, as if, yeah, he was there, but he was not there, or vice versa. It was like he was not there, yet he was there, in regards of you never really knew what was happening and you would never really be sure, right? Something like his relationship with his coach Kavanaugh. They didn't have the best of bonds. Why was that the case? What happened? You know what I mean? Things of that nature. And I think right now, when everything is downhill for Conor McGregor, when everything is as low as they can get for him right now, I think he's really going to be having to go ahead and rebuild everything to be very strong. And I think that is really the right thing to do. And I think that is what is exactly making his comeback potentially very great. I'm of the idea that with all this heat and doubt Conor brought to himself, the urge to bounce back must be pretty high for him. And unlike most of his doubters, I don't believe that he's done until he actually is. So by the time he will be back inside the octagon, I believe that his carelessness, recklessness, wild style of fighting will also be eliminated. I believe the main reason Conor even looked to be fighting out of character was because of the style he was facing and the mindset that he was in going into the fight. In comparison, before the Khabib fight, Conor was a very steady, calculated fighter. He knew how to go in there, walk his opponents down without having to throw anything significant. He powed out his hands and he marched forward calmly. For example, against Eddie Alvarez, knowing that Eddie doesn't have a weapon that will be a range setter, he was able to be successful with that type of style. And I believe that is something very important in Conor McGregor's game, knowing how to fight his opponents. Many people seem to be only remembering him as the fighter who would float around and really just go in there and pop his opponents, sting him and knock him out. Sure, against a fast-paced fighter like Marcus Brimage, Diego Brandao, Jose Aldo, he uses movement to get these fast and light-moving featherweights to walk into his shots. But against guys who were heavier on their feet and who would really just stand their ground, he would too, and he would meet them right in the middle of the octagon and back them up like he did against Poirier, Chad Mendes, Nate Diaz, Eddie Alvarez. That was just something that I wanted to clarify about Conor's style, because what we got from him against Khabib was just something that we couldn't really identify him with his own skills. And from all the training footage that we saw from Conor recently, he seems to be set on this total shell high guard. Maybe the McGregor bout really made him change his mind, that a change in striking style would be better for him, seemingly from a wide karate style to a more closed guarded style. It could be that since he moved up in weight, overusing his legs to bounce around against heavier opponents may not be that necessary to begin with, as we saw against Eddie Alvarez. I personally do not think much of it really, as it is only training. Here, he is switching to the orthodox stance and he's mainly focusing on getting his left side better, improving that side as well. So in the end, I don't really believe that there has been anything that has gotten worse with Conor besides his own mental approach and game planning. But that is a matter of thinking ability rather than physical ability. However, one thing that I'm questioning right now is the fact that he is 31 years old. He has only fought once in MMA in almost 3 years. The question is, when is he going to start to slow down? Now, Conor's not a fighter that took a lot of damage, so in that regards, I'm not really thinking that he physically got weaker, like his chin for example. I just have to believe that getting older would kind of take away from his youth, right? From his youthful abilities, whether that is being very quick with his reflexes, being skinnier, which ends up with him being lighter. Right now he's gotten a bit older, he's gotten a bit heavier, so maybe the movement from that has been taken away as well. And really, in the end, I don't really know how all of that is going to be affected. Seemingly, we have two versions of Conor. One that showed up in 2016 after coming off of 3 fights, right? Then goes in there and fights Eddie Alvarez, as sharp as he can be. Takes off 2 years, comes back and fights Khabib, right? So he doesn't even look good in that match. So whether it is a question of mental states or game plan, or whether or not he is truly gotten quote-unquote washed up, will only be proven how he looks in his next outing. Because up until he fights and shows what he's really still all about, I will have to still think that if he really wants to fight the same way that he did, if he wants to be as effective, as successful as he once was, I think that he could. The only problem is, he just didn't have the right opponent. Going into a fight with Khabib, I mean, that is going to be a tough fight regardless of who you are. So if Conor McGregor can go in there and fight the guys that are currently in line for him to fight, maybe he's going to look as good as ever. So who could he fight in his return, and how would he look in those matchups? Right now, the only 2 fights that I think are of any significance for Conor is a fight with Justin Gaethje or Dustin Poirier. Now, Justin Gaethje, let's start with him. He is going to be a very tough fight. Out of all of Conor McGregor's opponents, he is really going to be the one guy where I'm going to be questioning whether or not he is going to be able to take ring generalship. Because Justin Gaethje is going to be, in my opinion, the physically stronger fighter. He's known to be the guy that can put up a high guard, put his chin down, take shots on his forehead, and just walk everybody down, chopping down at the legs, and just march forward. And against Conor McGregor, I'm not really certain how Conor is going to be able to deal with a guy that can do that precisely. However, recently, Gaethje has shown to be a bit more of a calmer fighter, a bit more calculated, so he won't really walk into big shots as he used to against, for example, Michael Johnson, Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier. However, with that, it may kind of play into Conor McGregor's favor as well, so that may be an opening that Conor McGregor can take as an advantage, because it is not going to be as fast-paced of a fight. However, one thing that Gaethje seriously struggles with is distance. People that can go in there and have distance over Justin Gaethje really can go in there and land beautiful shots on him. Gaethje doesn't really have, let's just say, the most advanced defense. His main defense is his offense. Now, Conor McGregor, I think he's going to have a serious speed advantage and accuracy advantage. He's also going to be the fighter who has the wider range of attacks in the stand-up department. Knowing Gaethje, I highly doubt that even against Conor McGregor, he would just level change and shoot him for a takedown. And even if he tried, in my opinion, I don't really think that he has that MMA experience that is necessary to go in there and take Conor McGregor down, because Conor doesn't have bad takedown defense at all. And as we have seen from Dustin Poirier, Eddie Alvarez, these guys were able to just go ahead and weather the storm up until Justin Gaethje starts to slow down a little bit. And Justin Gaethje is probably going to be the only guy that is the most likely fighter to somewhat slow down when the fight really gets to be a fight. And against Conor McGregor, I highly doubt that it is really going to be much of a fight in regards of it being a very competitive back and forth decision fight that will last either 5 rounds, 3 rounds, whatever it may be. I think that either way it goes, I think both fighters will be very conclusive with who is going to be coming out as the victor. Now, Conor McGregor, in my opinion, he has a great chance of winning against him. I think that he has the fight IQ that is necessary to keep somebody like Justin Gaethje at bay, Justin is not really a fighter that can dictate range very well, so I think Conor McGregor is going to have that as an advantage because he's going to be one step ahead of him. And if Conor can go in there and be the first to land, I think that Justin Gaethje will have to just go ahead and respect the distance, and then he will be the fighter that he is currently. He was a bit more of a range fighter. He doesn't really walk into shots as he used to. And at that range, whether Conor McGregor decides to utilize his kicks again, that is going to be a big question mark. If he decides to use his kicks again, I think Conor McGregor is going to be making it a lot more easier on him. And I think that is one thing about Conor McGregor. The reason why he hasn't really been kicking too much is just because of the guys that he has been facing. There has just been too much of a takedown threat. Against Nate Diaz, he threw a lot of kicks early on up until he broke his foot. Against Eddie Alvarez, there is a big grappling threat. Against Khabib Nurmagomedov, there is a big grappling threat. So against Justin Gaethje, without that big grappling threat, I think that he can go in there and utilize all of his skills. And with that fire back, or at least having something to prove again, I think Conor McGregor is really going to be at his very best, and I think he's going to really show what he can do against Justin Gaethje. So in my opinion, that is going to be a very winnable fight for him. He's faster than him, he's a lot more rangier than him, and he's a lot more versatile than Justin Gaethje. However, this doesn't mean that Justin Gaethje is going to be an easy fight at all, but it is a very winnable fight, especially given the fact that Justin Gaethje is kind of a guy that can get riled up, right? If Conor can go in there and use the right words and utilize correct mental warfare, I think that he can really get under his skin and really make him fight out of character. We saw Justin Gaethje go in there and do it against Michael Johnson, and I think Conor McGregor can do the same exact thing, if not worse. So I think overall, Justin Gaethje is not only a better win right now, but I think it is more so a way better fight for him to begin with. If we take a look at Dustin Poirier, Dustin has become a very good fighter. He has packed on a lot more weight, he looks a lot more healthier, a lot more bigger, a lot more able to take damage. And I think going into a fight with Conor McGregor, knowing that is going to be a factor that is at least going to be a bit more favorable for him, I think he's going to have a lot more confidence in going in there and at least exchanging with Conor McGregor. However, given the fact that they are both southpaw fighters, I think Conor McGregor is a bit more equipped in fighting a fellow southpaw fighter than Dustin Poirier is. We saw it against Michael Johnson. His entries were completely reversed and he completely walked into a shot. Against Conor McGregor, he didn't really know how to get off his shots without walking into Conor McGregor's great left-hand shot. Now, the big difference between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier right now still is the fact that Dustin favors round punches, whereas Conor McGregor favors straight, linear, fast punches. So naturally, as they're both, let's just say, going to exchange, I believe Conor McGregor is not only, first of all, faster than him, I believe the trajectory of both of their punches will just really be in favor for Conor McGregor to land first. So with that said, I think in terms of exchanges, I think Conor McGregor is still going to be coming out the winner of those little exchanges. And besides, given the fact that Conor McGregor can go in there and utilize his kicks once again, I think that keeping the distance is going to be in his favor as well. Now, defensively, Dustin Poirier has improved tremendously. He has become a great fighter at rolling with the punches. We saw it against Justin Gaethje. We saw it against Max Holloway. However, the main difference with those guys is that they cannot really mimic Conor McGregor in the sense of being the fighter that is going to make Dustin Poirier really make the first shot, make the first attempt, right? Because Conor is very good at countering these guys. He's very good at baiting out the reaction and just countering immediately. Conor rarely is going to be the guy that will be consistently and always just in the face, and always just the first guy to initiate. He's always very good at countering and then just continuing on following that up. So against Dustin Poirier, I think that he's just going to be able to maintain that dynamic even to this day. And given the fact that Dustin Poirier is not really a fighter that will come forward consistently like Justin Gaethje does, he's more inclined to take the outside, as we saw against Khabib, right? He was just more than comfortable taking the outside and just instantly going on the back foot. Against Conor, he will go on the back foot, and if you're backed up against Conor, it is going to be a very, very tough night for you. Now, with all that said, even though Dustin Poirier has improved, I still think that Dustin, his style is not really made to beat Conor's. And I think out of Justin Gaethje and Justin Gaethje is going to be the tougher fight and the more important fight in terms of name value, because Justin has been coming off of a 3-fight win streak over a guy that Conor McGregor wanted to fight himself, Donald Cerrone. And Dustin Poirier just got defeated by Khabib Nurmagomedov in a fight that wasn't even close. So in my opinion, whichever option Conor may take, and hopefully it is the Justin Gaethje fight because it is the more intriguing fight in my opinion. However, the Dustin Poirier fight is a fight that is a lot more promotable They already have a fight. It has been a long while since that fight. Both have improved. Conor became champ. Dustin became interim champ, just fought for the world title as well. Where are they both now? It's a great storyline. I wouldn't mind seeing it. But in terms of meaning, I would still have to lean for the Justin Gaethje fight. So if Conor McGregor is in the right headspace, I believe he can beat everybody in the division. But will he? That remains a question only time will answer. Whether he will be yet again the victorious Notorious, we will have to wait and see.